Hello and welcome to the Vantage Deployment to Azure explanation video. As we already mentioned in the course, Vantage deployment consists of four main parts. 1. Creating an infrastructure for Vantage deployment. 2. Downloading Vantage container images and specifying their dependencies. 3. Installing Vantage. And 4. Vantage post-installation setup. In this video, we will cover the first three parts, and we will finish by running the installed Vantage instance. You can find detailed instructions as well as sample code for setting up the Azure deployed Vantage infrastructure in this course, or in the System Administrator's Guide. I'll be using the Admin's Guide as a reference during the deployment. This is going to be a live deployment on our training Azure subscription. We will be installing the Without High Availability Vantage configuration. This means that we don't need to have the Redis cluster deployed beforehand. So let's take a look at the Vantage installation schematic and see what components must be deployed to prepare the infrastructure for Vantage deployment. As you can see, all the infrastructure parts are deployed on Azure, including a load balancer, blob storage, container registry, SQL Server and database, and for an email service, you can either use SMTP Server or Azure SendGrid. We will go with the SendGrid option in this demo. Okay, let's get going. The process isn't hard, but it is time-consuming. I will start with opening the Creating an Azure Infrastructure to Install Vantage section of the Admin's Guide. And I'll be creating Vantage infrastructure components one by one, as is described in the System Administrator's Guide. You can deploy all the resources using the Azure Portal GUI, but you will need to check the parameters of each required resource in the corresponding template file inside the installer container. Or you can create, as I'm going to, the majority of the resources from inside the installation container using the Azure CLI commands, which contain these mentioned template files as parameters. In any case, for both options, we need to have a container registry first, so you can push the installer container into this container registry. This is why, to begin with, I'm going to create a new resource group that will contain all the Vantage components. Then I will create a container registry inside this resource group. These resources don't require any specific parameters, so I will create them directly on the Azure portal. I am logging into our training account on the Azure portal, and I'm selecting resource groups. Here I will click Create to create a new resource group. You need to select the Azure subscription, the region, and specify the name of the new resource group. So here we have a dedicated subscription named Vantage Training. I will name my resource group Vantage Lessons, and I will be deploying everything in the East US2 region. Click Review plus Create. Azure will run a few validations to check, for example, if the selected region has a quota for such resources, and if everything is okay, and it is okay, you can see the validation passed message. You can now hit the Create button and the resource group will be created. Now the Vantage Lessons resource group is listed among all other resource groups in our account. If I click on Vantage Lessons, I can go to the resource and see its parameters in detail. Now, as I mentioned, I need to create a container registry. So I'm navigating to the home page, and as I don't see container registries listed in the most recent Azure services, I will use a search option to find the container registry resource. Here we go. Container registries. Select it, and here click Create. You can see that the needed subscription is selected automatically. This is because I have only one subscription available. If you have several, you'll select the correct one. Then you need to specify the resource group, and in our case, it's going to be the resource group that we have just created, Vantage Lessons. Now let's create the container registry names. Instead of being super creative, I'll simply type in Vantage Lessons. Then we need to select the location. I'm deploying everything in the East US2 region, but you will select the one which is applicable for you. SKU. For my deployment, standard is enough. If you select Premium, you'll have some more features available, but Standard will work for you as well. OK, I'll hit Review plus Create, and then Create. Here it says Deployment is in progress. Let's wait a bit. Now it's finished, and I can click on the Go to Resource button. In the settings of my Vantage Lessons container registry, you can see this login server here. This is nothing other than your container registry address. We will need this several times during the deployment. Here you can see the access keys. Select this parameter to enable the admin user. Now you can see the credentials of your container registry. You will need to specify them later when filling out the parameters of the env-specific YAML file. OK. The next step is to download the installation container, push it to our newly created container registry, and run it. Then we will deploy all the other needed resources from inside the installer container. As I mentioned, the installer image already has the prepared templates for deploying the resources. I'm going to start my Windows PowerShell. By the way, I'm installing Vantage from my Windows laptop. You can do the same from any Linux machine with Docker and Azure CLI installed. I have a dedicated folder named Vantage Install on my laptop. In this folder, I have all the files that I will need during the deployment, and I navigated to this folder. So we need to log into Azure first. This is what I'm going to do now. When you run the AZ login command, you are prompted to authenticate to Azure in a web browser. I'll pick my account named Lessons, and here we go. I'm successfully logged in. Go back to the PowerShell window. You see your account information in the command response. The next step is to set up the subscription on Azure. Without setting up the subscription, you cannot populate any resources. These commands are listed in the admin's guide. Here is the sample command to set up the subscription. We will be changing what's highlighted in red, and we'll be providing our environment parameters instead. So here you see we need to specify the subscription ID. I am using a code editor to modify the commands. You can use any text editor. OK, let's find our subscription ID. I open the Azure portal and select Subscriptions. Here I have only one subscription available, and I can see its ID. Let's copy and paste it into the code sample. OK, good. Now I'm copying the entire command and pasting it into PowerShell. Here we go. The subscription is set up. We can push the installer container into our container registry. To do so, we need to log into the ABBYY Docker registry first. In the admin's guide, here is the command. We don't need to change anything in this command, so I'll just copy and paste it into Windows PowerShell. It says login succeeded. Good. The next step is to pull the installation container from the Vantage Docker registry. Again, the command remains the same. Here we go. Now we need to tag the installer container for our container registry. In this command, we need to specify our Azure Container Registry address. I will use my editor to modify this command. Here, instead of this register.yourdomain.tld, we need to put the address of our container registry. Let's find it on the Azure portal. I'm opening the container registries list, and here's our Vantage Lessons registry. Open it, and under the login server, here, you can see the container registry address. I'm copying it and pasting it into the sample code. Good. Now let's copy the code and execute it in PowerShell. And the last step is to push the installer into our container registry. This is a Docker push command. Here you can see it in the admin's guide, and we need to change the registry address again. I can take the address here in the previous command, paste it into the Docker push command, then into PowerShell. And here we go. The container is being pushed. Usually this takes several minutes, up to 10 if you have a slow internet connection. In this video, it's sped up. Okay, it's done. Let's now run the installer image. To do this, we have the docker run command, in which again, we need to specify the container registry address. So I am copying the command to the editor and I'm pasting vantagelessons.azurecr.io instead of this registry.yourdomain.tld. Good. Now let's run the command. And here we go. Bash 4.4 shows that we are inside our installer container, and we'll proceed with the creation of Azure resources required for Vantage deployment from this container. To be able to create any resources on Azure from the installer image, we need to be logged into the Azure account, and we need to set up the subscription. Therefore, we will now repeat the very first steps. We'll run the az login command and then the az account set command. Here is my AZ login, and the login procedure slightly differs from the same command on Windows. In the response, we have the URL to log into the Azure portal and the code that we need to provide to authenticate. Here I copy the URL then put it in the browser. Now I need to provide the code, so I'll go back to PowerShell and copy the code. Here it is. Now I'll paste the code, click Next, pick the Azure account, and hit the Continue button. Okay, we are signed in. In PowerShell, you can see your account information, and now we can set up the subscription. This is the same code that we executed before. I'll copy it, here we go, and run the command. Okay, good. The subscription is set. Now we'll create a Kubernetes cluster on Azure. In the System Administrator's Guide, you can find the needed command here. By the way, there's also a command to create a resource group using Azure CLI, but we've already done this simply via the Azure Portal GUI. So let's go to the Kubernetes cluster creation part, and the important thing to note here is this. There is a what if command. This command checks if the resource can be created and what components will be created within a specific resource. We suggest you always run the what if command prior to running the create command, which actually creates a resource. So I'm copying the command to the editor. Okay, now I'll remove the extra spaces like this. So in this command, I'm going to create a Kubernetes cluster. Let's check the parameters of the command so it corresponds to my environment. Here I need to create a cluster name and specify the resource group name. Let's go to the Azure portal to find our resource group name. Then here's the resource group list, and we can see my resource group. Open it, copy its name, and paste it into our code. Okay, now we need to create a cluster name here. Let's have it be Vantage Lessons Cluster. And we need to pass it as a parameter too, so I copy the name here and add it at the end. Okay, I'm checking that the command is correct. Now let's put the command in PowerShell. Oh, I copied all of the commands in the editor, but it's okay. Let's just run the last one. It's running now. Good. No issues were found and everything is in green. This means that the resources can be created. I'm going to change what if in the command to create and execute the command. It's running. It takes some time to create a Kubernetes cluster. In this video, all the running commands are sped up. The cluster is created. You can find the cluster on the Azure portal. Let's open it. Now I'm searching for Kubernetes services. Here this resource is. Select it, and you can see our newly created Vantage Lessons cluster. It's listed. Now we can open it to find its parameters. Okay, good. Let's move on. According to the admin guide, the next step is to create storage accounts. Here we have the whatif command. Oh, this is an old command. The template was changed recently. Look here, the create command for storage differs from the whatif command. A few additional parameters were added to the command. This is a mistake in my admin's guide. Most probably, by the time you watch this video, the guide will be fixed, but for now, just bear with me and use the create command sample. What I'm going to do is to change create to whatif, run the whatif first, and then, if there aren't any errors, run the create command. So copy the command into the editor. Now we will need to provide our resource group name here. I can take it from the previous command. And under the parameters, provide the cluster name. I am changing create to whatif, and let's run the command. Everything is green, no errors. We can use create now instead of whatif. Let's go. Good. The Vantage storages should be created on Azure. Let's see. Okay, I'm searching for storage accounts. And you can see there are several storage accounts in my subscription, but Vantage requires 4 storages. Here they are. Okay, good. Now what we need is to find the access keys and secret keys for these storages. To find the keys, we can run a specific command. And here you can see the sample code. Let me copy it into my editor. Okay. And now I need to specify the resource group name. I can copy it from the previous command. Here we go. Let's execute the command. Aha! It says command not found. Sure enough, I didn't copy the whole command. I missed AZ. Let's do this again. Now it's much better, and we got the response with the keys to storages. I'm going to copy these keys into a file and save them. We need to provide these keys in the env specific YAML file. Okay, good. Let's continue, and we're going to create an Azure SQL Server and SQL databases. The procedure is just the same. Take the sample code with whatif and specify the parameters. Resource group name, cluster name, Now, this is important. During the creation of the SQL Server, we need to pass the admin login and admin password as parameters. If you forget the username and password put here, you will not be able to deploy Vantage. So pay attention to these parameters. I'll avoid getting creative here for this demo, so my SQL Server admin login is going to be Vantage Training, and the password, I'll just make it Vantage Training with ones instead of I's. But you must do better than me here and create a strong password for your production environment. Okay, we are ready to run the command. So, no errors found. Let's create a SQL Server now. Change what if to create, then run the command. We have successfully created the server. Now we can create the Vantage databases. Let me quickly complete this task. You don't need to provide any specific parameters here in this code, just the name of the resource group and the cluster name. Let's run the what if first. All's good. Now I'm changing what if to create and running the command. The databases are ready. We can navigate to the Azure portal and find the SQL Server and the created databases. Here you can see the database server created in our resource group. And when we open it, we can go to the SQL databases here, and you can see here all the databases created for Vantage. We are almost done with the deployment of the infrastructure. The last thing is to create a public IP address. But before creating the IP address, we need to find the name of the cluster's node resource group. To get the node resource group name, let's run this command. I'm providing the cluster name and the resource group name, and let's run the command. Okay, here we have the needed resource group name. Let's save it into a file. And now we can create a public IP address. Let's open the public IP addresses list on Azure and click Create. Vantage supports IP version 4. I'll create a name here, IP Vantage Lessons. Here we can select the subscription. In my case, it's Vantage Training. Now the important part is the resource group, and from the list of available resource groups, we need to pick the one we obtained when executing the last command. Here it is. Let's open the file where I saved the node resource group name and check, yes, this is it. You can see in the name our parameters. Vantage Lessons is the name of the initial resource group, Vantage Lessons Cluster, the Kubernetes cluster name, and East US 2 is the region where we perform the deployment. Okay, good. Let's create the public IP address. You can see the message Deployment in Progress. We can click here, wait for the deployment to be completed, then click Go to Resource, and here you can see the IP address. We need to save this to a file too. Good. Now we are done with the environment creation. I'm going to exit the installer container for now. The next steps are to download all the Vantage images and fill out the environment-specific YAML file. First, let me show you what documents I've prepared for Vantage deployment. As I mentioned before, I have a dedicated folder called Vantage Install. Let's see what's inside this folder. To begin with, here I have the image.list file that I've downloaded from the admin's guide. If you open this file, you will see the names of all the Vantage containers. This one is a bash file, which contains a sample script that goes over all the images listed in the images.list file, pulls them from the ABBYY Docker registry, then pushes them into your container registry. In this script, Vantage User, Vantage Pass, and Vantage Registry are static. What we need to change is the container registry name here. And this is what I'm doing. Apart from this, I don't need to change anything in the script. Okay, now I will save the bash file, open PowerShell, and log into the Azure account from my computer. Here we go. Now we need to set up the subscription. And there is one more step. You don't have this code in the admin's guide, but you might need to log into your container registry. This is the AZACR login command. This command requires the name of the container registry. Let's find it on Azure. Our container registry name is Vantage Lessons. Good. Now let's execute the command. Login succeeded. Good. And now I'm going to run the bash script that downloads the images. It's running. It takes approximately 1 hour, maybe a little bit less depending on your connection speed, to download all the Vantage container images and push them into your container registry. While the images are downloading, I'll fill out the env specific YAML file. I have the sample env specific YAML file in my folder. You can download this file from the admin's guide. Let me open it and edit the file so it corresponds to the environment we have just created. First, env is a subdomain. For me, it's training. My installed Vantage address will be training.abby.com. The next parameter is POC. Literally, it stands for Proof of Concept, and in Vantage, it is used to indicate the without high availability configuration. I'm changing this parameter to true because I'm installing no HA Vantage. The following parameter is domain, which is your domain. In my case, this is abby.com. The host address of your deployed Vantage will be the combination of the env and domain. The next parameter should be set to true if you want to enable the Federal Information Processing Standard. This is not the case for me, so I'll simply skip it. Now, the product host, as I already mentioned, is a combination of the env and domain. The next parameter is a load balancer external IP. In our case, this is the public IP address that we created on the last step of the environment deployment. Let's open the file where we keep this IP address, then paste the address here. Or alternatively, you can find this IP on the Azure portal. Let me quickly remind you where it is. Here, yes? Okay, good. Let's move on. The next group of parameters is logging. First, specify if you need logs at all, and in production, you need logs. Then, if you have Elasticsearch and Kibana deployed, you can enable them. I don't have them, so I simply use files for logging. Basically, I didn't change anything in the logging part, and this corresponds to my installation. The next group requires information about your container registry. I'm going to open the container registry access keys and find the needed information. The container registry host in the env specific YAML file corresponds to the login server of the Azure Container Registry. The container registry user equals the username here. The login registry password, you can copy the password from here. The container registry name, in my case, is equal to the container registry host. I am removing this /vantage. This is because in the script that downloads the images, I push the images directly into the container registry and not in the Vantage directory in the container registry. If you have a look at the sample script in the admin's guide, here, you can see that we have a Vantage directory in the registry. Now in my sample script, I just use the core directory without the Vantage subdirectory. If you use the sample script from the admin's guide, then you need to leave the /vantage in the container registry name here. Okay, let's move on. The next parameter is install NN extraction training workers, and it is by default set to false. If you want to enable deep learning neural networks in your Vantage, you need to change the value to true. I'll leave it as is. And also, I'm not going to change the Vantage namespaces. So I'm moving to the platform admin email parameter, and I will put here our training account email. Be careful to note that this is not the Vantage end user email address. This is the admin's address, someone who has permissions to manage tenants and subscriptions in Vantage. A person with an admin email will later create tenants for end users. Now you need to decide if you're going to use an SMTP server or Azure SendGrid. These are the email services for Vantage to send automatic emails to customers. For example, when a new tenant is created, the corresponding email with the tenant credentials is sent. I'm using SendGrid here, so I'm enabling it and specifying its API key. This is a real one, so it'll be blurred for you. If you use an SMTP server, you'll need to specify its IP address, username, and password. Now, the mail from parameter. This is the email address that Vantage will use to send notifications to users. I'll put here something like noreply@abby.com. The token management group of parameters is used to enable connections to the Google and Microsoft email services. This can easily be set up even after Vantage is installed. I'm not going to set this up, so let's go to the database parameters. Here we need to specify the database host address. I'll show you where it is on the Azure portal. We need to open the SQL servers list. Here's our server. Open the resource, and you can see the server name here. This is what we need to provide in the env specific file. Then we need to specify the username and password. We created these two parameters at the SQL Server creation step. I have them in the code that I used. Here, I'm copying the username first, and the password. Good. And finally, the storages. Here we need to specify the storage keys and secrets. We got them after running the az deployment group show command, and we saved the keys in the file. So I'm going to carefully fill out the storage information in the env specific YAML file using the data from this file here. First, we need to provide the access key and the secret key for the skills storage. Here we go. And like this, I'm copying and pasting the keys into the env specific YAML file. Great! This is it for me. Because I'm installing a no HA configuration, I don't need to specify the Redis cluster parameters, and I'm not going to install the reporting warehouse. Now I'm going to go through my env specific file again to check if everything is correct. Yes, it seems to me that all's good. Let's save the updated env specific YAML file. Now let's open PowerShell. You see the containers are still being downloaded. This is the most time-consuming part of the Vantage deployment. This may take up to 1 hour, but in this video we have cut this time off. And now you can see the result. The command response, all done. Good. You can now open the container registry, go to repositories, and find all the Vantage containers there. Okay, now we are ready to install Vantage. For this, we need to run the installer container again, but this time we will also transfer the env specific YAML file and the SSL certificate to the container. Here in the admin's guide, you can find the needed command. I'm pasting this command to the editor, and I need to specify the location of the env specific file and the folder named SSL with the certificate files. Also, I need to change the container registry address. In my case, both the updated env specific YAML file and the SSL folder are inside the Vantage install folder on the C drive. Let me check one last time if everything is correct. Here's the SSL folder, and you can see the cert.pem and key.pem certificate files inside. And let's open the env specific to make sure this is the correct one. Sure enough, everything is correct. Good. Now I'm changing the registry name here . And we are ready to run the installer again. Let's do this. Oh, it says invalid reference format. Let me check. The space is missing here. Let's quickly fix this. Okay, once again, Here we go. We are inside the installer container now. I'm going to check if the files were copied inside. So here's what we have in the container. You can see that env specific is located in the inventories/Azure/group_vars/all directory. Let's open the env specific file. And this one contains the data that we have just provided. So all's good, we are ready for Vantage deployment. First, we need to connect to the Azure account from the container. The link, now, the code, here we go. Second, we need to set up the subscription. Okay, good. Now we need to link the Kubernetes configuration or the .kubeconfig file to our cluster. To do so, I will open the Kubernetes service on the Azure portal and click Connect. Here you see the instruction on how to get the Kubernetes configuration. This first command shows how to set up the subscription. We've already done so, but the second command is what we need now. We don't need to edit anything in this command. When we run it, the kube/config file on the installer container is updated with the data from our Kubernetes cluster Vantage Lessons cluster. We can check this by running the kubecontrol cluster info command here. You can see in the response that the Kubernetes control plane is running on the Vantage Lessons cluster, Core DNS is running on the Vantage Lessons cluster, as well as the metrics server. This means that the kubeconfig file is updated with the Vantage Lessons cluster info. I'm going to start one more PowerShell and run the same command. This will update the kubeconfig file on my Windows laptop as well. Later, I'll be able to connect my cluster to Lens, for example, to monitor the cluster state. So, AZ login first, okay, now set up the subscription. You cannot perform any operation on Azure via Azure CLI without the subscription setup. And finally, the command that gets the kubeconfig file. Now you can see that this kubeconfig file is already on my computer. I will close this second PowerShell. I don't need it anymore. Then open the PowerShell in which I've already started the installer image. At this point, we only have to run the 3 Ansible playbooks to deploy Vantage. Here in the admin's guide, you can find the first playbook named 0 preflight check azure.yaml. This playbook runs the pre-installation check to find out if all the required namespaces can be deployed and if there aren't any errors. For example, if all the data provided in the env specific YAML file is correct and Vantage can connect to needed resources, or if there are valid SSL certificates. We don't need to change anything in the playbooks, we simply need to run them. Let's do it. Here we go. It takes some time to run this playbook. Okay, great. You can see there are not any failed tasks and no errors. Vantage can be installed. If this playbook stops on an error, you will need to fix this error before you try to deploy Vantage. The second playbook is called Legal and is required to accept the ABBYY privacy policy and the EULA. You cannot install Vantage without accepting the legal terms. So again, copy and paste the code, run it, and here you need to agree to the end user license agreement. For this, simply type yes, and again, agree to the ABBYY privacy policy by typing yes. Good, we are done with this. And finally, the last playbook is named Site Azure Deploy. Let's run it. Our Vantage is being deployed right now. This may take up to 20 minutes. You can open Lens or any other Kubernetes monitoring tool and see how Vantage is deployed. The playbook deploys the platform first, then deploys workers like skills, import, export, etc. In this video, the deployment process is cut out. And congratulations! Vantage is successfully deployed. When Vantage is installed, you will get the admin's credentials to your Vantage instance. You can see the URL, our training.abby.com, and then the admin's login, lessons@abby.com, and the automatically generated password. Don't lose this. If you do, you'll have to reinstall the monitoring namespace. Before running Vantage, I will open Lens on my laptop. You can see that I'm connected to the Vantage Lessons cluster. This is because I updated the kube config file. As you can see, the namespace is ABBYY Vantage. You can see the running and pending pods, deployments, and jobs. Some of them are pending because, as I said, even though the platform is deployed, some workers are still being deployed. Let's switch the namespace to ABBYY Infrastructure. Everything is running here, and ABBYY monitoring is successfully deployed as well. We can check the deployments network services. Here you can see the public IP address that we created is used as a load balancer's IP. You can monitor the whole deployment and see if there aren't any issues or errors. Now, as I'm on my local machine and I don't have a DNS server, I will manually do the etc name mapping. For this, I will open the etc hosts file on my machine and add the public IP address with its URL into the file. Here's my IP address, copy, and it's going to be training.abby.com. Save the file. Let me close all my unneeded windows and pages, and let's run our just installed Vantage. Here we go. We need to provide the admin's email. Good. Now the password that we received after running the last playbook. Yes. Welcome to your Vantage. This is the admin's page. From here, the admin user can create tenants and users. So this was quite a procedure, but considering that we started from scratch and created the infrastructure first, it was not that complicated. All these steps are described in the System Administrator's Guide. Sample codes are provided for you as well. Also, you can refer to this video during your deployment. We wish you'll have a smooth Vantage installation, and we hope you truly enjoy working with Vantage.